and it's their intrinsic
And they found, this food basically robs
sounds and food or sound like reptilians. They are everywhere. You can't study antiquity and not find these serpents all over the place. It is serpent, reptilian symbology everywhere in the ancient world. You got statues of snakes. You have stories about these serpents being worshipped. You have stories of dragons. You have a whole culture that worship serpents and dragons. It's all over the place. You know, the Thai, the India, and in Thailand, they worship the Nagas. In China as well, they worship the Nagas, the serpent gods. These were supposed to be serpent gods. When they showed depictions of them, you got statues of them shapeshifting, showing half human, half man. I was in Thailand, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. I took a picture next to one of them because, you know, I knew what they was talking about. So it's everywhere. It's all throughout the ancient world. It's in Egypt, as we're going to get into. It's all in Africa. It's everywhere, the worship of these serpent beings, these dragons, whichever one you want to call them, they are still reptilians. Now we know in the Chinese culture, they have the year of the dragon. The last year of the dragon was in 2012. It just passed not too long ago. But they worship the dragon. We know they have all kinds of festivals and dances and everything. But also when you look at the Chinese zodiac, the Chinese zodiac is called the Shenzhou. When you look at the Shenzhou, the Chinese zodiac, you see a dragon. A dragon is on there. Now the thing is, everything else on that zodiac exists. We can find it, we know it exists, except for that dragon. The thing is, you know, if dragons are supposed to be mythological creatures and these serpents are supposed to be mythological creatures, how come they were worshipped? They are worshipped more in Chinese culture than any other animal on the zodiac. They are highly worshipped still to this day, and in the ancient world when we find it. So we can't look at the whole reptilian thing and just blow it off. And I never did. It's just information that I always have that I'm giving to you now. I'm way past this information. I'm just putting it out now to relate to you what you need to research. The reptilian thing is something that you can't run away from. Now, this David Icke who's talking about it, I'm gonna get into him because he's a misleader, plain and simple, but we'll get into that later. But these reptilians, all over the place, you can't escape them. You can't escape the symbology. You can't escape the history of it in the ancient world. So we know the Chinese talk about them a lot. They worship them. We know that 13 is the unlucky number in Chinese culture. And when you look at the zodiac, they have 12 signs, just like we have 12 signs of the zodiac. But there is a 13th sign of the zodiac, and it's called Ophiuchus. Now, Ophiuchus is basically the serpent bearer, and he would be the 13th sign of the zodiac. And when we look at the 13th sign in our culture, we know it's the sun is there on the cross of the zodiac. And they basically moved the sun and put Jesus on the cross. Now, the whole thing is when you go back and look before Christianity, you find a serpent on the cross. Now, when you look at this old 16th century depiction, this German depiction of a coin, one side you have Jesus on the cross, the other side you have a serpent on the cross. We know in the Bible, Moses puts a serpent on the cross. Now, when you read, I think it's Numbers 21:9, Moses put a serpent on the cross. Then in John 3:14, it says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man, Jesus, be lifted up. So just like the serpent was on the cross, when Moses put the serpent on the cross, it's basically foreshadowing Jesus being placed on a cross. So as I said, you can't blow things off. You can't look at stuff and say somebody is crazy. You have to research things. And like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, over 15 years now. And 15 years. And it never ceased to amaze me how much people don't know, or how much information people blow off, or the traps that people fall into when it comes to this information. The reptilian is more prevalent in what's going on in this world than anything else. And that's just a fact. And when we finish this video, you are really going to understand that more than anything. So now, the word serpent or serpent is mentioned in the Bible over 40 times. Also, reptile and dragon is mentioned in the Bible. But we know we always find serpent, and we find dragon, and we see that Satan is referred to as a serpent and a dragon. So we find this throughout the Bible. So now, since we know the Bible stole from Kemet, we know it stole from Egypt. What does Egypt say about these reptilians? Where do we find this serpent or these dragons in the Egyptian culture? Now, when you go look there, we find gods. We find serpent, we find reptilian gods, serpent gods all throughout Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Now, here we have Heket. Now, Heket is the Egyptian god of fertility. When you look at depictions of Heket, when you see her hieroglyphics or you see drawings of her, she's not a reptile, she's not reptilian, but she is amphibious, she's a frog. But why a frog? Because frogs have tadpoles. And when you look at a tadpole, it almost looks like a seed or a sperm going to fertilize an egg. That's what it resembles when you take a look at it. But Heket, when you look at some of her hieroglyphics, you can see her sitting with Nymph. Now, Nymph, in this depiction, she's sitting with, and they are basically making man. They are molding man. This is a very important depiction right here you need to pay attention to. Now, you have Nymph and you have Heket molding man, and this is going to be very important as we go along. So now, we know the Greeks stole from Kemet. We know they stole from ancient Egypt. We know when you start studying Greek mythology, when you start studying Greek antiquity, you start looking back at these Greek gods, a lot of them correspond with Egyptian gods. They basically took the deities from Egypt and they basically changed their names and created deities that fit who they really are, who the Greeks really are. We're going to show who they really are. Now, here we have Agatha's Damien. It says, known in Egypt as the protector god of Alexandria, whose sanctuary was apparently founded by Alexander himself. The oldest evidence for this cult is a passage from the Potter's Oracle, 130 BC, where Agatha's Daemon is identified with the primeval snake Nymph. Now, I just showed you Nymph with Heket, a whole depiction of them two making man on the potter's wheel. Now it says, for the rest, the cult was confined to Alexandria and is only known from the Roman period. The worship of Agatha's Daemon as a prospective house snake appears to have a Greek origin further. He mainly appears in Greek literature. So here we have this snake, a serpent, who is being attributed to Nymph, who is another Egyptian deity. So this all going to come together, trust me, it's all going to make sense. But this is just a part. You're going to find this so much in Greek antiquity and in Greek mythology that they have basically stolen deities from ancient Egypt and changed them to fit who they are. Okay, so Agatha's Daemon is associated with Nymph. Now, when you look at Agatha's Daemon, it's a depiction of a serpent, of a snake. Now, when I showed you the depiction of Nymph, you can see that it's a ram. That's Nymph there speaking with Heket. It's a ram. So why do they have this serpent, as a representation of this ram, this Egyptian god Nymph? So who exactly is Nymph? Nymph is the Egyptian god of creation. This is why you see Nymph with Heket fashioning man on the potter's wheel. It's creating man. So they took the representation of Nymph, this goat or this ram, and switched it with this serpent. And there's a reason for that that's going to become clear. But when you read for Nymph, it says here, in Egyptian mythology, Nymph was originally the breath of life, his name meaning soul breath. Indeed, according to Plutarch and Diodorus, Nymph was identical with the Greek pneuma. Pneuma means basically a breath of life. Nymph, in this context, was a spirit that breathed life into things, giving them form. Nymph eventually became considered to be the creator god himself in Elephantine, although his identity was finally assimilated into the more important god Amen. So, again, you got this serpent, Agathis Daemon, representing Nymph, this creation, this creator god, this Egyptian god of creation. So it's going to be more clear why they did that. Now, the whole thing is, as I pointed out, we can see that they're going to be stealing a lot of Egyptian gods and deities and making them fit who they are. So now this is another depiction of Nymph. It's an egg with wings. This is actually a Masonic symbol. When you see this a lot of times, it's dealing in Freemasonry and they use it. Serpents, snakes have eggs. They lay eggs. Reptiles lay eggs. Humans do not. So now what does this go back to? This all goes back to Genesis. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. Now understand that you have two creations, as I have pointed out. The first creation is this normal creation, but the second creation is something different. It's different altogether. You had basically God forming man from the dust of the ground, not creating man normally. So what was Nymph's name? Soul breath, the breath of life. What did God do in the Bible? He breathed the breath of life into this dust and gave it life. This is why the Greeks took this symbol and switched it with the serpent, which is going to become more clear later, because they're taking the Egyptian depiction of fashioning man and putting their spin on it like they do everything, and is representing them, as you will see shortly. So now we know who was deceived by the serpent. Eve. Eve was deceived by the serpent. So it's more into her being deceived than we know. So now, if you've seen my video, That's Game, the Bible and Christianity Finally Explained, if you made it all the way to the end of that long video, it was about 6 hours, then you understood how everything came together at the end. All the secrets start coming out. Everything started to make sense. Now, I said in the video, and I showed that the parable of the Bible, almost every parable, when you started to decipher it and figure them out, they all go back to ancient Egypt. You know, the Garden of Eden story is no different. The symbology here, as we can see, goes back to ancient Egypt. When you see in the Bible, it's saying God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So when you find out that it corresponds to an Egyptian god Nymph, whose name is breath of life, and when he breathes the breath of life, he's giving form to something, you can see where the Bible got that from. It's the same depiction, the same thing. It's in the Garden of Eden story. So the whole Adam and Eve story is symbolic. It's symbolic of the snake, the serpent, what it's talking about here in Greek mythology. So Eve being deceived by the snake, then passing it to man is something we're going to get into later, because that has, huge implications when you read it, what it's saying. So now when you realize that Noah is a descendant, he comes from the line of Adam and Eve. Now remember, if we look at a lot of the depictions of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, we can see that in some of the depictions, the serpent is shape-shifting. It's half like human, half snake, wrapped around a tree. It's showing that symbolizes shape-shifting for people who don't know. It's shape-shifting. It's half serpent, half human. So when you go into the book of Enoch, it's saying here, he is not human, but resembling the offspring of the angels of heaven, is of a different nature from ours, being altogether unlike to us. So could Noah have been a reptilian? So when they seen him, could he have been a reptilian? Now we know they're saying his skin was white, but that's symbology. But it also says that he is not human. So we know white people look human when you see white people. So we can't say, well, he was a white person. It's symbolic of the serpents mating with the albinos of the African people. That is the parable here if we did not get it, and it's going to make sense as we go along. So the whole thing is, the person who created this book of Enoch They created specifically for you to use with the King James Version, with the Bible. I'm clear of that. Anybody who studies it knows it. So you have to take the parables that is showing you in the King James Version as well as in the book of Enoch, and you can do your comparison. So it's the symbology here is these serpents, whatever you want to call them, reptilians, made it with the offspring of the children of men. So they made it with basically the albinos of the African race and created something else. We're going to get into that. So now for anybody who may be confused, let me make it a little bit more clear to understand. The first creation that I was referring to in the Bible, the first creation, male and female created he, them, those first people, that is symbolic of just normal creation. Now, when I said that represents African people, that's because we are the first people and everybody came from us, all other races. So look at this first creation as the creation of African people and everybody that came from us, including the albino or the white man. So let's just say this creation represents all races of people on the planet. The second creation is symbolizing a different creation, something that is, fabricated, something that is, different. It's different from our normal creation. You see, it formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. This is why it's saying that it fashioned man. This is a different creation, separate from natural or normal creation. So when the Greeks introduced the serpent into this, and they did so by switching nymph with the Agatha's daemon, the serpent, that's symbology here. Now, take that symbology, that serpent symbology, it goes to the Garden of Eden where we have the serpent. Now, you have a deception that happens there with the woman and this serpent. That is symbology of what I'm going to get into later that's going to make more sense. And she passes it to man. But I'm going to get into that later, and we'll come back to this, and it's going to all make a lot more sense. I'm not saying that these serpents or aliens or somebody else created the white race. No, they came from us, period. It's a lot of people who hate white people who want to believe that aliens created them, or they are some kind of alien race, and you got some white people themselves who believe that. No, can't escape it. We are the mother and father of all races on this planet, period, point blank. There's no way around that.
One more important piece of the puzzle was found in 2005, when cancer researcher Keith Chang was studying the black and white stripes of zebrafish.
There are a lot of zebrafish in my laboratory because I'm a geneticist and I study how mutations occur, which is how cancer occurs, and I use pigmentation to detect those mutations. By chance, the light skin-colored fish that I used for that research also taught us a lot about how Europeans, how humans became lighter skinned.
What Professor Chang discovered was perhaps one of the most important genetic mutations ever found. A single change among literally billions of coded instructions within zebrafish DNA that reduced black pigment from their stripes. Soon after, this identical genetic mutation was found in fair-skinned Europeans.
There was a magic moment in this research. When I got back the results that showed that the number and the size and the amount of pigment in the light-skinned zebrafish were all diminished, and the same thing happened in humans. When I opened the textbook and saw that same thing, I began to sweat. Not only did light-skinned people evolve from black-skinned people, but lighter-skinned people, whether they're European or whether they're Asian, like me, were actually mutants of the dark-skinned people.
This was remarkable because we had only inferred on the basis of circumstantial evidence that this must have occurred in evolution, but we didn't have any concrete genetic evidence. Now we do.
Now, let me tell you how you can prove this. And this is how you gotta really dig deep and do critical thinking. If an alien race created white people to somehow, let's say, rule us, why would they not give the white people technology? Why wouldn't they give them the information that they need? Understand, we can prove this in history. All throughout history in the ancient world, you have every race coming into Kemet.
Wie geht es Ihnen? Guten Tag. Ik ben Feldwebel Ernst Ooms, 5th Motorized Battalion, Großdeutschland. Basically, for those who haven't spoken German, we basically said is, how's it going? Good morning. I'm Feldwebel Ernst Ooms of the 5th Motorized Division of the Großdeutschland Division. What we are portraying here today is an MG-34 machine gun team. First of all, let me give you a little history about our particular unit. The Großdeutschland Division was considered one of the elite divisions in the German Army. And you can tell an elite division in the German Army because they were given cuff titles to wear on their right sleeves of their uniforms. Großdeutschland means Greater Germany. To have been a member of this unit, you would have had to have been born in one of the original 13 provinces of Germany. How the German army basically organized their divisions was generally geographically. So they would raise men from a particular geographical region, with the exception of the Großdeutschland Division, which took in men from the entire country. The Großdeutschland Division fought the entire war with the exception of a small time in France in 1940 on the Eastern Front against the Russians. That was why we chose to pick this particular division to portray. We didn't want to pick a division that historically fought against Americans, even though we do that at these reenactments all the time. To give you a little bit of an idea of what warfare was like on the Eastern Front, it was basically horrendous. The Großdeutschland Division, between May of 1942 and in January of 1943, was an 18,000 man division. They took 100% casualties in that 6-month period. That means 100% of the men were either wounded, killed, or missing in action. Obviously, it wasn't the same group of 18,000 men because they were rotating men in and out. War on the Eastern Front was horrendous. The division was used as a firefighting division. Every time the Russians were breaking through in the sector, this division was moved into that area to try to hold back the Russian horde. A little bit about our weaponry and our uniforms here. First of all, our ranks. I am a Feldwebel. Feldwebel means field mother in German. I'm equivalent to a sergeant in the American Army. My comrade here, Klaus Schultz, is a Gefreiter. He's equivalent to a corporal. And then we have Grenadier Edward Lohr, who's basically a private. Our uniforms are an early war model uniform. This is what the German army was wearing when they marched into Poland in 1939. As the war went on, they had to simplify their uniforms, and to do that, to keep up with production, they did things like getting rid of the pleated pockets, stopped dyeing the pants gray. They got rid of these bottle green collars. They even started simplifying the boots. Instead of the jack boots, they started going to a lower, low boot to save on leather. Ed, show them the bottom of your boots there. They were used heel irons and hobnails on their boots, again, to save on the shoe leather, because Germany, those of you who do not realize it, is about the size of Wisconsin. So that they didn't have a lot of natural resources, so they had to stretch with what they had. Okay, with respect to the equipment, being a Feldwebel, I would be carrying an MP40 submachine gun. This is a 9mm submachine gun. It has a 35 round clip. You pull the trigger in about 8 seconds, we'll fire all 35 rounds. Klaus here is carrying the standard infantry rifle, what is called a K98 rifle. When you hear designations like MP40 or K98, the number is the year the weapon was designed. This weapon was designed in 1898. Mine was designed in 1940. How the German army fought the war was significantly different than how the Americans did. They had the tactic of attack, attack, attack. They were always on the attack, even when they were on the defensive. And that was realized in their weaponry. At the end of World War I, they did an analysis of what happened on the battlefield, and they realized that a target was only visible for about 2.5 seconds. So to be effective, they had to design very high rates of fire weapons. So the first weapon that they designed was the MG-34 machine gun. The MG-34 machine gun fired 8mm rounds, the same ammunition that the rifle would utilize. It had a rate of fire of between 12 and 1,400 rounds per minute. The rounds would be put on linked belts of 50 rounds, and they would be carried in ammunition drum cans. They would carry 250 rounds of ammunition. The belts could be linked together to create longer chains. A weapon like this could not actually be fired at that rate of fire, 12 or 1,400 rounds per minute, because the barrel would literally turn red hot. And when that would happen, the bullet's accuracy is lost and the bullets just start spraying all over. So they would shoot the gun in short bursts, between 5 and 8 round bursts. And then what they would do is carry spare barrels, okay, and change out the barrels to let them cool down. It would take about 3 seconds to change the barrel on that gun, okay? The German army provided one machine gun in every squad of 10 men. Okay, the machine gun was the main source of firepower, and the riflemen with the 5-round bolt-action rifles supported the machine gun. Now, conversely, what happened with the Americans in World War I was a little bit different situation. They were in a situation where they had to move forward and get into the trench lines. And when they did that, they were starting to realize that they did not have enough firepower. So towards the end of World War I, they started developing semi-automatic rifles. And the first one they developed right near the end of the war was the Browning automatic rifle in 1918. That developed into a handheld weapon that was called an M1 Garand, and I'm sure the paratrooper showed you one of those. So their theory was to put the firepower in the individual soldier's hand, and the machine gun supported a soldier. And the American Army, the machine gun was considered a company weapon. Ours was a squad weapon, theirs was a company weapon. So maybe every 75 men would have a machine gun, where every 10 men in the German army had a machine gun. After this weapon was designed, they came out with another weapon that was called the MG-42. It had a rate of fire between 16 and 1,800 rounds per minute. The American soldiers called that Hitler's zipper, because when it fired, it just made a ripping sound. You couldn't distinguish between the individual bullets being fired. It was a very intimidating weapon to come up against. Some of the other equipment, it was a gas mask canister. Even though poison gas was not used during World War II, the German soldier was required to carry his gas mask because Hitler was a casualty of a gas attack during World War I. Most of the soldiers would get rid of the gas masks and put their clean socks or their cigarettes in the case, but if they got caught doing that, they were severely punished. So it wasn't something that they would do. The German army was as brutal on its own men as it was on the enemy. Get turned back around. What he is also wearing, because he's a machine gunner, his sidearm is a pistol, much like mine. The other distinctive feature of the German soldier's uniform was the Stahlhelm, which means steel helm, steel hat in German, and the shape of the helmet You can see that now the modern day American Army has adopted this, this shape. The weapon, how the weapon would be used, you guys want to get into position? Basically, they would have, again, a 10-man squad, so you would have six riflemen, 3 on each side. They would have the machine gun commander, which is my role, and they would have another ammunition carrier behind these 3 guys. I would be giving them direction as to what the target was, what direction they would be shooting at, what the distance was to the target, and how many rounds to fire on the target. It would be my responsibility to try to adjust their fire using my binoculars if they were firing high or low in correcting their fire. That weapon could also be shot either semi-automatically, single shots, or in an automatic, firing. They could shoot through that 50-round linked ammo in probably about 10 seconds on that gun. With that, I'll leave it to you folks if you got any questions. I thought of one thing I forgot to mention is their hand grenades. Okay? For those of you who are a collector of American memorabilia, this looks like the old-time potato masher, which is what the GIs called it. The reason it's shaped like this is for a specific reason. It is much easier to throw this hand grenade than it is the American pineapple hand grenade, because this stick on it gives you leverage. You can be laying down on the ground, and it really allows you to get much more distance than you can trying to throw the American pineapple type hand grenade. This type of weapon, again, is an offensive weapon, whereas the pineapple hand grenade is a defensive weapon. This is a concussion grenade. Its purpose was to throw it at an enemy position. It blows up and stuns them so that you can race forward and take the position. The American hand grenade is defensive in nature. As you throw that hand grenade, it blows up and it's shooting shrapnel in every direction. It's not something that you get just as much chance of hitting yourself with that weapon as the enemy. So it was just used in a situation, a bunch of guys are running at it, you just throw it and hope it hits something. So with that, of course, if there's any other questions, we'll let our other comrades take over from here.
Any questions?
Very good.
Mitch, if you were to recommend any books about
Yes.
German soldier?
Probably the best book about the German soldier that I've read, and it's interesting enough, it's actually about a guy who was in the Grossdeutschland division. It's called The Forgotten Soldier by a guy named Guy Sager, S-A-J-E-R. He actually had a French mother and a German father, and he was conscripted into the German army in 1940 and was sent to Russia in 1942 and fought right to the end of the war with the Grossdeutschland division. And I'd say that's probably the best book that I've read on a German soldier.
Thank you.
Yep.